Welcome to Discover the Difference, a podcast brought to you by C3 Insurance. I'm your guest host, Matt Clark, here with my friend today, Landon Donovan, and our co-host, Jamie and Gabe. So we have Landon Donovan with us today. He is a really dear friend of mine. We go back about 5 years now, and we get into some deep conversation. You know, speaking to Landon, he mentioned to us, wow, I didn't think I was going to go this deep today. You know, we made this podcast more about him as a person and not him as the soccer player. And I hope you guys really enjoy it.
Take us back, because we've had a couple of Olympians on the show, and it's always interesting to hear at like what point in their life the Olympic path kind of unfolded. Mm-hmm. Was soccer from the time you were very young a big part of your life, or
good question?
Where did it ramp up?
So first of all, just to paint the picture, the Olympics for soccer are not a huge deal. Our World Cup is the equivalent of a skier's Olympics, right? But the Olympics to me are a huge deal because I'm an American sports fan. So I grew up 2 hours northeast of here in Redlands at the base of Big Bear Mountain. My older half brother, Josh, is 5 years older than me. For whatever reason, loved playing soccer. So as soon as I could start walking, he was kicking a ball with me. And at that time, 40 years ago, almost nobody else in the country was kicking a soccer ball at 2 years old. They were throwing a baseball or, whatever, shooting a basketball or whatever. So because of that, we just played all the time. We were playing obviously way before cell phones existed. So we were outside playing all the time. So I was playing soccer every day from 2, 3, 4, 5 years old. And I didn't know it at the time, but I was just better than everyone because of that. When I became a teenager, I could start to tell at 12, 13 that I was like a good player. But at that time, Major League Soccer didn't exist. I didn't know anything about the foreign soccer world because we didn't have internet. I didn't know anything about it. I couldn't tell you one team in Europe.
Yeah, you didn't have a team you followed.
All we had was like video cassette tapes that we would watch. I would get as Christmas presents and watch past World Cups. But I didn't know anything about the greater world. So at 14, I went through puberty, and because I was a really skinny kid, and I got bulkier and stronger and like really fast. And that was the first time I realized like, oh, I think my genes are pretty good. My dad was really athletic.
There's something here.
And that all combined led me to a tryout for what's called the Olympic Development Program. And it doesn't really still exist now, but at that time it was an identification.
And my son's in the water polo one.
There you go.
So in water polo, it's still really big.
So they're trying to identify, right? Because, because they didn't know where to find the next soccer player. They didn't have scouts around, and you didn't have this streamlined MLS academies. So they were trying to find players. So I'll never forget, it was like a Wednesday at practice, and we're 14 years old. And our team manager from my club team said, "Hey, do you want to go try out for this Olympic development program on the weekend?" And I said, "No, I just want to like play with my buddies and like play basketball and whatever." And he's like, "Well, are you sure? This is kind of a big deal." And I said, "I don't want to go to a tryout and like do like skills and stuff." And he said, No, you just play all weekend." And I was like, "I'm in." So as soon as he said,
"Why did you say that in the first place?"
Yeah, so I went to this tryout.
Where was that?
So the way it works is you do it in your small little area, like 6 or 7 small towns around you. Okay. And then if you make that team, they take you to like a little bit broader, like district area. So I made the first team, made the second team. The third team was the Southern California state team tryouts, which I made. And then from there, I went to Montana to try out for the 13 Western regional states.
Montana is where they chose.
Yeah, it was interesting, right?
Yeah.
And so made that team, and then went to Florida to try out for the full national team, the youth national team, and ended up making that team. So that was my path there.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
And then cool. you stuck around and played in Florida, or you come?
So then with the youth national team, the way it worked is probably once a month we would have a camp somewhere, 3 days, 4 days, 5 days. So a lot of times they were in Florida. So I would come back home, and then I'd go away for a week. Which at 15, you were like the man, right?
Yeah.
Like, because I didn't have to do school. I could take my schoolwork on the road and like
Well, and how was your parents supportive of that? Because that's really different.
Good question. So
right?
my mom's a teacher.
Especially back then.
My mom taught special ed for 30 years, so she's very into education. So she was supportive as long as I made sure to keep up with my work. Again, even at that point, there was no end game. So she was just supporting my dream, and I loved doing it. She could tell how much joy it brought me. So as long as I kept up with my schoolwork, it was fine. But then the kicker was they wanted to make this team, this under 17 national team. There wasn't enough competition. So what they decided to do was have us do a residency program in Florida and move there. All about 20 young men move there full time. And so we would go to school in the morning and then train in the afternoon. So that took a lot of, convincing of mom, but I was able to convince her. Meanwhile, just so you know, my dad, at 2 years old, my parents got divorced. My dad wasn't around a lot as a kid. He started to come back in like our teenage years. So he had, some input, but most of it was with my mom. And so I was able to go to live in residency. But just before I went to residency, we were playing a tournament in Austria with the under 17 national team. And a guy walked up to me. This is how scouting used to work in the old days. A guy walked up to me after one of our games. And he said, "Hi, my name is Michael Reschka, and I am from Bayer Leverkusen." I was like, "What is Bayer Leverkusen? What the hell does that mean?" He said, "We're a professional team in Germany, and we're interested in signing you." And you can imagine, I'm 16. I'm like, what does this mean? I had no concept of it's not like someone was like, "Oh, we're from the Lakers. We want it now." You'd be like, "Oh yeah, the Lakers, of course." Yeah. I had no idea. So I told my coach, I told my mom. We eventually started talking to an agent just to sort of start to understand that landscape, if that was going to be a reality. But in the end, they were very convincing, and I thought it would be an interesting thing to do, exciting thing to do. So again, my mom said, as long as there were two caveats. One, you need to finish high school, either through finishing high school or you need to get a equivalent, GED. High school equivalent, right? And two, whatever the contract is they pay you has to cover college, because you're going to get a college scholarship now. Right. And I don't want to, we grew up dirt poor. And so what we ended up doing was I took a high school equivalency exam in California just before I moved to residency. And then my first contract, I'll never forget, was 4-year contract, $50,000 a year, which, at that time would cover college-ish. So the beauty of going to residency was at 6:30 a.m. Everybody on my team had to wake up and go to school, but I didn't have to go to school. So
you already placed yourself out.
Yeah, so I already took the test.
How old were you at
the test? I was 16. So
That's
imagine
smart.
16, you wake up every day, you don't have to go to high school. I was I was sleeping in. Yeah. I was living the dream. And then in the afternoon, we would have practice, and I was all rested and feeling good. And these guys were like, math class and all this stuff. It was a dream. So
that's pretty amazing that your mom supported that.
Especially given her background. Yeah. I mean, she took a big leap of faith. And
why do you think that was? What was it about? Have you ever asked her that question?
Yeah, and in her heart, she really didn't want to. But we have kids. We all have kids, right? So I'm trying to think, if my kid at 16 was obviously that good at it and really, really wanted to do it, I don't know how I'd react, because it's for every me, there's 50 to 100 that don't make it.
Oh, more than that.
Right.
Yeah.
And so
there's also the other 50 or 100 that parents say no to.
True. Also,
it comes into,
that's right.
I think when you are looking at your kids, how happy they can be or not be. And as long as you have kind of those rules that keep you in the lane,
Yeah, the boundaries.
Yeah, then it would be really hard to look at your kid and know that something could make them so happy and not allow them to at least pursue it.
I know.
I think.
Yeah. And, as a parent, you're probably thinking, I don't want them to look back on this and resent me, right. For not doing it. And imagine, I'm kind of getting goosebumps, but imagine she had said no, and all of this would have never happened.
There wouldn't have been a Landon Donovan that we know.
Again, there's lots of others who didn't make it. So it was tough for her, but...
Well, it sounds like she kind of was a single mom too, right?
She was a single mom.
Which makes it even more tough, to let your
Well, also,
let your baby go away.
The other piece of this is I have a twin sister.
Okay.
Oh, you
And
do?
so that was challenging too, because now.
So your older brother's 18 months older?
No, my older brother is 5 years old. He's a half.
Oh, that was your
He's
kids.
a half brother.
Okay, got it.
And then I have a twin sister. So now her daughter's brother, other half, was leaving too, which was hard. So she says to this day, my mom says to this day, like, she'll say, I regret it to some extent, because I left home and she misses those years, and my sister. But in the end, I know
How did your
it
sister
was the
deal
right
with
thing to
it?
do.
What was that like for your sister?
It was hard for her.
Yeah.
My sister is the complete opposite of me, and she could give two whatevers about me playing soccer. She just doesn't care, and so it was hard for her to lose her son, her brother.
What about with your father? When you said he came back into the picture when you were a teenager, what prompted that?
It's hard to know for sure. I think I've not lived it. I've been a part of my kids' lives my whole life. I'm guessing at some point you sort of come to your senses and say, I really don't want to be gone forever.
Yeah.
I don't know exactly.
Is there resentment there between you and your sister with him?
I did lots of therapy and came to a place where I forgave him.
Yeah.
Like truly forgave him. And that was, forgiveness isn't about the other person. It's about you.
That must have been hard.
Right?
Yeah.
It was hard to get there, but I tell you, this is an interesting story. If people think the mind and body are not connected, they're crazy. So I went through a stretch I want to say it was 2007. I had this like high groin injury that would not go away. And it didn't prevent me from playing, but we couldn't figure out what it was. It wasn't like a strain. It was just like this tightness, like something was pulling and it was really annoying, really painful, but I could do enough to play every week. It lasted for a year. So I had it for a year. So during this time in 2006, I started going to see a therapist, and for a year we were talking, of course, a lot about my dad, but just all of my childhood and how it all impacted.
Is this
me.
while you're in Florida?
No. This is later. I was mid-20s.
Oh,
I'm in LA at this point.
Got it. Yeah.
So we're talking one day about my dad, and we get like deep into it, and it's like I can tell I'm on the verge of like breaking through something. And when you've been through enough therapy, when it's there. We call it aha moments. I would call it an aha moment where you're like, oh, now I get it. And now I'm really getting goosebumps. And in the moment I figured it out, it all clicked, and I was just bawling in her office for a long time. And I swear on my kids, I woke up the next morning and my groin was healed.
Wow.
Like I never felt it again. It was insane.
So you're holding that in there.
I was holding it so tight, and like I didn't know what it was, but then.
So what was the aha? What did you have in that moment?
Glad you asked. So at the time, so we had just signed a player who you'll be familiar with, previously signed a player named David Beckham.
Heard of him.
Who came to our...
Even I heard of him.
Came to our team.
Jamie watched the movie.
There you go. The four-part docu-series. So this was a few years after David came to the team. And when David first came, remember he had been playing for Real Madrid, Manchester United, England. He'd been playing for the best teams in the world, always winning. And he came to our team in 2007. And we basically lost every game. We were in last place. The facilities weren't what he was used to. The accommodations weren't. The food wasn't. So imagine going from that, and now all of a sudden you're in this terrible situation. I mean, it could not have been a worse situation for him. And he understandably kind of like pulled away a little bit, kind of distanced himself. So like he would show up really late before training. He would leave right after training was done, and you could tell he was really frustrated. That really frustrated me because the LA Galaxy were the team I loved. It was like NC State for Matt. It was like they were my everything. And when I see this guy who came, really shook up our world, but then wasn't like engaged, putting it all in, doing the hard work, I was like, that's not fair.
Yeah.
Right. And so I don't know if you're starting to put together 2 and 2 here.
Yeah.
But my frustration, I was really upset with David. I mean, like, really upset. And when I've realized in my life when something is that deep and is that frustrating, it's not about that. It's about something else, something deeper. And so in therapy through a long time, my frustration with David was my frustration with my dad.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Because just like my dad,
Just left.
He abandoned. He didn't
he
engage.
How do I phrase it? He wanted all the good stuff and the glory without doing the hard work or without dealing with all the crap. Right. And so and I don't blame either of them, but as a parent now, I'm like, okay, you got to do the hard stuff and it sucks, but you don't get to stand in the winner's circle if you don't run the race. Right. And so that was my frustration. The minute that clicked and I realized, oh, that wasn't about David, that was about my dad, I realized, okay, I also have done things in my life where I didn't put it all in. And I was just able to find that compassion for my dad and forgive him. It still hurts. I wish he hadn't done it, but I was able to just say, you know what? It's gone. There's nothing's going to change. So let's just, and from that moment, then back to my growing.
That's pretty freeing to
it's
go through,
amazing,
though, right?
liberating. That's why I say,
with David, how did you approach it? Did you ever approach it with David?
The wrong way. Yeah. So I wasn't aware enough. I hated confrontation always. And I never confronted him directly, and I should have.
Right.
And so during that time, there was a reporter who passed away actually in 2022 during the World Cup in Qatar named Grant Wall. And he wrote a book called The Beckham Experiment on Beckham's first few years, the Galaxy. And at this time, it was like total disaster.
Right.
So he was talking to about 4 or 5 of us. And I basically used him as a therapist and just
dumped
went
it on him.
Yeah. Right. And I was smart enough to know that this was not a smart thing to do, but I just needed to get it out.
Yeah.
So the book came out and it was not good, right? I had some really nasty quotes about him. And so the day after it came out, of course, there was 75 media people there to talk to us and be like, whoa, what?
You're on the same team, right?
Yeah.
At this time,
yeah.
right?
And poor David, he wasn't a great teammate or pro the first couple of years, but he didn't deserve that, right? He has enough stuff to deal with. This bombshell thrown on his lap. So that's how I dealt with it then. But that day, our coach, Bruce Arena, the book came out the night before, and all the excerpts and all that stuff. And the next morning, our coach, Bruce, brought us into the office, me and David and him. And we should have done this years ago, right? I should have just addressed it. And when we walked in, I said, Bruce started talking. I said, let me just start. I said, I'm really sorry. I did this the wrong way. I should have just said all these things to your face. It's not that I don't feel them. I do feel it and I believe it, but I should have just said it to your face, David. Right. And to his immense credit, he just said, it's no problem. I haven't been the best teammate either. And from that moment on, we went, that was 2009. So 2007, 2008, 2009. 2007, 2008 were terrible years, but then we got much better in 2009, 2010 much better, and then we won the championship in 11, 12, and 14.
Wow.
So, yeah.
And he was on the team.
Yep.
Yeah.
So it ended
all those years, 8 years with him? How many years?
7 years.
7 years with him.
Mm-hmm.
Wow.
He didn't harbor any resentment at all over any of it? Just
what I realized with him is when you're that famous, he was, at that point, you could say a top 10 most famous person in the world.
Yeah.
Seriously.
Yeah.
Everybody knows who he is. He deals with so much crap on a daily basis. Back home in England, there's an article about him every day just for no reason, just because they know people read it, right? And there's stuff made up all the time.
Get a little desensitized to it, probably.
And I think he's a very aware human being. He's not what you would maybe think if you just watched him on in a game. He's I know, and if he looked in the mirror, he'd say, I should have been better in my first few years too, and I could have done better about. So I know I could tell he understood that, and in the end, he, like me, just wanted to be successful, right? And going down the path we were going was not good for anyone. just to keep losing and it's not good for anyone.
It's pretty cool though that he took accountability, because for your relationship to heal, there has to be accountability on both sides.
Yeah, I think so. And he just wanted to be successful too. We all wanted the same thing. We just didn't know how to go about it, and we were frustrated.
And you guys still in touch?
Oh yeah. I mean, we don't, we're not texting all the time, but
Yeah.
I saw him end of last year. It was really nice to see him. And the one thing I give him the most credit for, again, what people never see is he was a phenomenal father. So he would bring his boys, eventually he had another girl, he had a girl, but he would bring his boys in, and people who have wealth and have the ability to just like pay away their problems I've learned can just do away with issues through nannies or housekeepers or money or people or whatever. And if his boys would do anything in the train, he was like on them, and he was like disciplined and strict, and they were like, okay, sorry, Dad. And that told me a lot about him.
Yeah. And I think that goes for all of us, right? I think at some point, we all want to buy our way out of issues.
Out of anything. You just want easy.
Easy. We want an easy street. And I think for him and you as well, what you're doing is that, with your kids, it's not going to be easy for them growing up in their dad's shadow, right? As a soccer player. But, I've seen them, I've been around them, they listen to you, and it's hard. And then for them to be able to just acknowledge you and be like, hey, Landon or David Beckham, like listen to them as parents, like just being able to go through that just is phenomenal, I think. And all of us parents want that for our children, because we all have that same problem.
It's hard.
It's very hard.
Are your kids old enough to understand the shadow that's cast, or?
Good question.
Are they getting like people come to them and say your dad's
8-year-old,
Landon?
Yeah, or sometimes we'll be somewhere and someone will say, can you sign this or take a picture? And my 8-year-old now he thinks it's exciting and cool, and so he'll kind of be like, after someone walks away, he'll kind of stare at me and they go, wow,
That's my dad.
And I just kind of get on with it,
Yeah.
But that will be a challenge.
Probably around that 8, 9, 10-year-old time frame, it's amazing how their curiosity peaks up as they're starting to understand the world a little bit, and then they bring that into the relationship. It's such a fun time. Like, I mean, we have it even in insurance. Our kids are asking questions about what's going on, so it's going to be a fun time.
And it's amazing how much they retain and like how fast they can learn things, and it's a cool time.
My 7-year-old asks me all the time now. He says, Dad, you're not the owner anymore. Are you the boss? And I just think it's interesting to look at that dynamic. And I'm like, son, yes.
He notices that.
Did you set him straight?
I just said, like, I'm
still the boss.
We're partners in this, but it's just interesting. He said that at 6. He already says like, hey, and you're not the boss anymore, Dad.
Because they're trying to figure out how the world works, so that they probably thought forever, oh, Dad's always going to be the boss. Right. Like, and now they're like, wait, how did that work? Yeah. That's
and now my kids are, and we have a mutual friend, and is my brother-in-law. He's a professional athlete as well. And so they're starting to, hey, Dad, are you ever going to be on TV?
Yeah.
Playing golf?
Yeah.
And I'm like,
probably not.
Probably not.
You'd be on a pro-am or something,
Doesn't work
right?
like that.
Oh, well, Landon,
He's waiting for the senior league.
Yeah. I
Dude,
mean,
what's
no.
worse, my wife, so I golf like 3 or 4 times a week now. It's obnoxious.
It's a
an obsession.
situation.
And I'll be like, we'll play so at our course we have the black tees, which are the back tees. Then we have the blue tees, and then we have the white tees. So we'll play the white tees. And I came home a few weeks ago. I'm like, babe, to my wife, I shot a 77. So there's only 5 over par, which is 99.5% of people will never do that, right? And I'm like, and my wife, she's like, that's awesome, babe. Do you think you can play professionally now? Like, are you out of your mind? I'm playing the white tees.
Yeah.
You know how many tens of thousands of people are better than, she has no concept. She thinks I'm going to go make money playing.
Well, are you competitive at golf?
Yeah.
Oh, boy.
But it's great to have a partner who grounds you, right?
Oh, she totally. But then I go play with Matt. I can't even beat Matt, right? And I'm like, and he's a good golfer, but I can't beat him. There is so far to go. And I always think about it when people watch sports and they're like, how did he miss that penalty kick? Wouldn't he? I could have done it. I'm like, you have no clue,
idea.
dude. You have no
I think we got in that situation, I think we'll go back to last weekend. Was it last week in Augusta? and we were talking about putting, and we have a group text. It's our Friday golf group, and somebody talked about putting, and his name is Landon. How these guys were missing all these putts at Augusta.
No. It wasn't missing. They were blowing these putts like 12 feet by the hole. And I said, because this is the first time I've really paid attention to
speed
golf.
issue, you mean?
Right.
And I'm like, is this the worst putting performance in the history of the Masters? Like I couldn't figure. Go ahead, finish.
So have you ever missed a penalty kick, Landon?
Yes, I have. But dude, it's one thing in golf, right? Very rarely do you see a guy with a 20-foot putt, a professional, put it 10 feet past the hole. Right. Like that's almost right.
Oh, no,
that's like never
truth.
happens.
Yeah.
And go ahead.
I mean, it's have you been to Augusta?
I've been to watch, but I didn't know golf at the time.
Yeah, right. So Landon's golf journey is pretty interesting, like to where he started and to where he is. I remember you were like a 14 when you started playing?
Well, I would
when you started playing with us, like 14 or 15?
Yeah, probably.
Okay, and now you're a 5?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So it's interesting with that is that, the grind and the competitiveness in him, to watch him at an age where when guys come to golf, at his age when he really started playing, to go where he's been today it's almost impossible. They don't have that opportunity. And, I was standing with him and my brother-in-law, Charlie, and our buddy, and there was a bet that Landon wanted to be a 2 or what did you want to be?
1-7.
1 or 7. He wanted to get down to 1-7. And everybody in our group, besides a couple of us, so they were like, no, there's no chance, right? And to his credit, Charlie said he's got it. And it's his athletic ability and his hand-eye coordination is unbelievable. I mean, and to go from where he started.
See, all those video games worked out, Mom.
That's right, all of them. To go from where he was to where he is now, and how competitive he is, how much he works on it. It's something to be said.
It's an
You talk
obsession.
about golf like you're passionate about it, Matt.
I do love golf. I mean, we don't. Landon. So last year, Landon and I hadn't really spent a lot of time together. And last year, we went to the U.S. Open. He picked me up at 4 a.m. 4 a.m. We had a 6. Charlie had a 6:30 something tee time, and I wanted to go with him. I mean, I've done this a lot, and I've seen a lot. I mean, I've been to Augusta, and I've been to a lot of places, and I've noticed. And when I started, and this goes to what you said, my journey was I was caddy, and when I caddied, I thought I was a good player. Like your wife said, could you play pro? And I was a good player. I shot 75s. I shoot a 70, even par occasionally. And I went and caddied out on it was back then called the Bet.com tour, and I watched those guys just on that, and that's below the PGA Tour, and I watched them. And it's a different game. And so to listen to him and I walk around, where were we? LACC.
It was so fun.
So fun. And to watch his face, like I've seen it and I've seen these guys, but I watched him the entire time. To his eyes light up to see this. I mean, literally, we went
like a kid.
Yes,
Kid in a candy store.
Yeah.
So
Just to see them hit the ball like
besides the
crazy.
competitiveness, being an athlete and being at the highest level, what else is that translating as to how you're playing golf today? Like, how have you see that you as an athlete? Is it the mental game? What do you
mean? What do you talk in reference to golf?
Yeah, and how you're able to translate into getting to as good as you are. Not saying it's professional, but to kind of what Matt's talking about.
I think what I've learned with not all athletes or former athletes, but a lot of us is we have this insatiable desire to succeed. And so if you play at the very highest level and you stay at the highest level for a long time, you're pretty unique. It's the athletes I've always had the most respect for, because a lot of athletes will play 2 or 3 or 4 years and then you don't hear from them again. But, Peyton Manning, Tom Brady, LeBron, Kobe, Michael, like, those guys did it for 20 years at the very top, and that's the hardest thing. So I love the idea of I was really bad at golf when I started, really bad. And there's the beauty of golf is you can get better kind of forever. I mean, there is a physical deterioration at some point, but you can't do that in any other sport. I can't play basketball now and be the same at 55. I'm going to be physically not able to. But at golf, you can keep doing it. I see guys in the 50s at our club in the 60s who, can shoot even par. So
is there any we talk to a lot of athletes and like special warfare guys, Navy SEALs, stuff like that. Is there any identity crisis you had as you reach toward retirement, and then is golf kind of filling that void? Or
great question. So my identity crisis happened during therapy. So I was fortunate because I figured it out while I was still playing. So I didn't have to go through retirement and finishing to then have that oh crap moment. So my identity was completely wrapped up in being a soccer player for all of my childhood into my mid-20s, until I started to realize why I was so hell-bent on being the best. And in my case, it was I wanted attention. I wanted my dad's attention, right? And I thought the best way to do that, because my dad was a semi-pro hockey player, played baseball his whole life, softball his whole life. I thought, oh, if I do this, now he'll recognize me. Now he'll want to be around, right? I didn't realize that at the time, but through therapy, I realized that's why I was so hell-bent on being successful. That, even though I'm aware of it now, to your question, I can't help it. So anything I do, I want to be the very best at.
So what's interesting is the fact that your dad, in essence left, and you're looking for his attention is part of what made you great.
Exactly.
Well, it sounds like
it's not part of it. It's almost all of it.
I
had to have the genetics, and I had to.
Yeah.
Correct. But it wasn't conscious.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So I was just like.
So is that part of the reason why you forgave him?
Because of the success? Is that what you mean?
What do you mean?
Well, just coming to this place, of forgiveness, or maybe just how were you able to do that? Through, I know you said, the forgiveness is a lot for you, and this compassion, maybe was that more for yourself, the compassion for yourself?
Oh yeah. I don't know. I hadn't thought about that. I think what I realized is just wasn't serving me anymore to hold on to that anger around him. It wasn't helping me, clearly. Right. So if it's not serving you, then just let it go. Right. And just let it be.
Yeah.
Yeah. But yeah, to your point, I would not have been what I was without that. Right. So you can complain about it as much as you want, but and I'll tell you what, you interview 1,000 top level athletes. I bet a lot of them have similar stories.
Yeah. So that wiring you did in your brain to push yourself to be as successful as you are, do you have to check that now as you interact with your kids? Or because there's one thing to have a shadow, but there's also an energy that can be cast. How do you balance that with your kids?
That's a good question. Well, it's more of a question of how do I balance it, like just in general at home, because if I had my choice, I'd be on the golf course 7 days a week and I would never see my family. Like I would. Yeah. And not because I quote love golf. I want to be so good at it. So I have to be aware of that. And sometimes like if I have so stupid, can't believe I'm saying this. If we have like a golf tournament the next day at the club, like the day before, I'm home like resting, hydrating, I'm thinking about that. And so like if my wife's like, will you go out and play with the kids? I'm like, no, I'm not going. I gotta rest.
You're playing that professional
this is my pregame
resting. I have to check it. I'll be like, you're such an idiot. Dude, just go outside. Yeah. You're such an idiot. Yeah. So yeah, it's hard. That's the part that's hard on, because it's just, I'm aware of it, but I can't help it. I'm like, it just.
Maybe we can go back, because we got to, I think, 17 or 18, and you had the contract and making $50,000 a year. And, the thing that was really important to your mom was to go to college, right? How did that end up changing, or, that was some kind of pivot, right?
Sure.
What did that look like?
Well, so I moved to Germany. I just turned 17. So I moved to Germany by myself. Can imagine being 17 and having all the freedom in the world. Like I could eat Frosted Flakes for dinner if I wanted, and like nobody cared. I could stay up till 3 a.m. and it was fine. And so that was cool. But the challenge was I had no awareness of what I was doing. I sometimes say soccer chose me. I didn't choose soccer, right? Because I was so good when I tried out for those teams, the earlier teams I was referencing, just made the next team, made the next team, made the next team. Pro team came, offered me a contract, went to the pro team, started playing, started moving up the ranks there. And I just kind of fell into the next thing and the next thing and the next thing. So that what happened at that point was after a couple of years of being in Germany, the way it works there is I was 17 when I first went. So I first started with their under 18 team. That was the team I trained with, played with. Then they had a reserve team, so which is the team just below the first team, the main team. Then I eventually worked my way up to the reserve team. And then I started training with the first team and I would play with the reserve team. But I could tell I wasn't going to play with the first team. I thought at the time I was good enough. I was nowhere near good enough. So after 2 years, I moved back to the States and played in MLS in San Jose for 4 years. I briefly went back to fulfill my contract in Germany, but quickly figured out I wanted to be back in the States. I loved it. Family was there. It was easier. And came back and went to LA and then spent 10 years with the Galaxy. So that was sort of the whole arc of my career. But early on, being in Germany was an interesting experience as a 17-year-old. Good and bad.
Sure.
Yeah.
Well, I know, like, when people think about soccer in the U.S., your name is like a household name. And I think you ask, kids that are, a few years younger than you, or adults now that are a few years younger than you, or even older than you, would say that, you've inspired so many people in the sport. And I guess my question is like, what does that mean to you?
The legacy.
That legacy. And then two is, soccer in the U.S. Has gone through, this roller coaster, and I think the 2002 World Cup was probably the pinnacle of soccer, at least the way that I look back on it. I don't know how you feel about it. Mm-hmm. And we always had this belief that in 20 years we're going to, get there, and 20 years we're going to get there. And then 20 years comes and we're still not there. Mm-hmm. So I just kind of want to get perspective on, the legacy that, how much you've inspired people, but then also is, when are we going to get there?
So the legacy piece, going back to what I just said about how driven I was, and I was so singularly focused, and it was selfish to be successful. I had no concept of what I was doing for anybody else. Zero. It never, ever came into my mind. Now that I've retired and I can step away and I'm not in that intense environment all the time, I can appreciate a lot more what has happened. The reality for most of my career is this is unique to soccer and other fringe sports, is you're a player, but you're also an ambassador, salesman. You're trying to grow the game in every way. So the amount of like appearances and things I did, like you wouldn't believe, right? To just try to grow the sport. But I had no interest in anything else except being successful until I retired. Now that I look back, and I'll see it through my son's eyes, or my daughter's eyes now. I took my oldest son out to the Farmers Insurance Open, the golf tournament here in January. Mm-hmm. And Charlie Hoffman, our mutual friend, was playing, and we were following him on the north course on the back nine. And there was nobody. I mean, on that part of the course, there was nobody there. So it was a few people and me and my son. And Charlie, the guy Charlie was playing with, threw my son a golf ball. And then Charlie has these green gloves, because Waste Management is one of his big sponsors. So he has a unique green glove, and he gave one to Talon, my son. And I see to this day, my son's got it like displayed on his counter, and I see through his eyes how inspiration works, right? And now he wants to go play golf all the time. And I never thought of that as a player. I wish I would have been more cognizant, because I would have done even more things like that, knowing how much it could just change someone's life. But I try to do it more now that I'm older. To your question about when will we get there, so it depends on how you define getting there. Okay, so the unique thing about soccer is that, like the Olympics, you're judged every 4 years. So you're not seeing, if you're a casual sports fan, you don't see what goes on in between. Kind of like, it's not apples to apples, but the NCAA tournament, right? I don't watch college basketball all year, but I turn it on in March and I'm like, I have a friend who loves the Wolfpack.
Holy smokes, yeah. NC State's there.
Right, yeah. Exactly. And I would have had no idea. I mean, zero idea. So every 4 years you get judged. So if you're judging it on when will we win a World Cup, there's so many factors at play that, winning a World Cup, only I think 6 or 7 countries have ever done it. The question for me is, when will we consistently compete to win a World Cup?
Yeah.
Right. And that we're still a ways from. The change now in the last really decade, but more so in the last 5 years, is we are starting to develop more world-class players. So if you think of for people who know soccer now, the biggest star right now is Christian Pulisic, who plays for AC Milan. He grew up in, I think, outside of Hershey, Pennsylvania or something. At 16 or 17, moved to Dortmund in Germany and started his youth career and then eventually his professional career. If you look at France, just by way of example, they have 40 Christian Pulisics coming through their ranks every year or two. We had one, right? So in order to compete at that level, the only way to do it is to develop the players capable of doing it. And we haven't done that yet, but we're starting to understand how important that is. It's not about getting 20 guys to be amazing every 4 years. It's about having so much competition consistently that then eventually you get there.
Do you think, what's happening in the MLS and the Messi era of, really growing the sport is going to help
For sure.
the expansion of the MLS?
Well, I saw it with David. So it's crazy to watch because I'm like, oh, this is just like David, except the sport's way more mature now and way more ready for it. So, yeah, there's no question. I mean, talk about inspiration. I went to a game at the end of last year. It wasn't an MLS game. It was this tournament called Leagues Cup. And it was in Nashville, and they were playing Inter Miami in the final. And the stadium, it was 30,000 people. It was packed. The buzz in the stadium was insane. It was insane. It reminded me so much of when David was around. There's just like this energy because you're watching a global superstar, and it was so cool.
Yeah, I'm from Kansas City, and I don't really know how Patrick Mahomes got involved in, becoming part owner in a pro soccer team, but is there intentionality between like cross exposure like that? Because if you follow him online, he's now promoting that a lot. And there's, in that geo, a lot of people are following him. So then as he cross promotes another sport,
for sure,
it casts a ton of people.
Well, we have that locally here with Drew Brees, right? And his involvement in youth soccer.
Yep. And his youth football too now.
Yeah.
It's no question. I mean, if you're a big Drew Brees fan, you knew nothing about soccer, you'd be like, oh, that's interesting. I think the common denominator is our kids, right? So like once our kids do something, I would never follow flag football, but my kids love it. So I'm like following flag football all over the place, or baseball. I thought I was going to hate my kids playing baseball, and I love watching.
It's so much fun. When
Mahomes it was interesting when Kobe Bryant, rest his soul, was his daughters. One of his daughters was really into soccer, so he would come in the locker room sometimes because he had a relationship with David. But like he was walking into an LA Galaxy game and locked because his daughter was into it. That was so cool.
That's a good point.
Yeah, it's cool.
Do you think that like David Beckham has gotten really plugged into MLS, and why didn't he go back to Europe?
That's a good question. Well, first of all, he had something unique in his contract. God, these guys are smart. So at the time when he came 2007, these are round numbers. You could buy an MLS franchise for probably less than $20 million.
Okay. That
was 2017. 17 years later, the San Diego franchise that just sold, I believe, was $500 million. So
you're not in that?
I am not,
No.
unfortunately.
By choice or?
Somewhat, yeah.
Okay.
I have too much golf to do.
Yeah.
So he and his contract, I believe, he could buy an MLS club for $25 million. So when Inter Miami was bought, wasn't that many years ago?
No.
Maybe 5 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
I think it should have been. They should have paid whatever $200+ million, and he got in for $25 million.
Wow.
So he's a genius. But anyway, so part of it is that financial piece. Yeah. But I always said, if the competition was close enough and the money was close enough, almost every player in the world would want to play in MLS.
Really?
Yeah, because you get to live in America.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Well, that's
And that
where
is
isn't that the big thing with Ronaldo versus Messi's choice?
Sure.
Like,
I mean, look, we're seeing it because we live in America, but there's no way, even from a marketing perspective and a visibility standpoint, I don't see Ronaldo that much anywhere. No. You know, obviously I'm plugged in MLS, so you're going to see Messi all over the place, but he was very intentional about that.
Yeah, he made a good choice, I think.
I think so.
Is the money comparable
to
Europe and here? What they're paying the players?
It's getting close.
Europe's ahead still?
Yeah,
for the top players.
The difference is the volume of players. So now there are probably 7 to 10 players on each MLS team making close to $1 million or more. If you go to a Premier League team, every one of their 25 players is making more than $1 million.
Oh, really?
Yeah. Huh. So just the number of players is more.
Makes sense.
Yeah.
But if you're really,
but it's getting close.
If you're good, I mean, it seems like right now it's a place where you kind of retire in the MLS.
It's shifting a little bit, but it's still, it used to be like 95% of players who are making a lot of money were in that mold. I would say it's less than 50% now. You're getting a lot of young South Americans who used to go to play in Mexico, but now the money is similar and the competition is similar, so they'd rather be in America. And then if they're really good, they move on to Europe from there.
Do you see more American players going to Europe to play? Is that happening?
Yeah, so it used to be the only way because MLS didn't have youth academies. So if you wanted to go at 16, 17, 18, if you wanted to start to become a pro, you had to go to Europe to do that. Otherwise, in America, you had to go to college. And that's competitively a huge disadvantage. Now what's happening, though, is because the MLS academies are getting proficient enough, you can stay here 16, 17, 18. And I would actually argue, it is definitely better at 17, 18 to be playing MLS games than it is to be training somewhere else and not playing games, right? There is a benefit to training, but playing games is where you get exposed, you get exposure, and then you just get better. You just get better through experience.
Do you think that currently the best players from the U.S. are still going to college and playing T1? No
chance. Very, very few. If you don't start your professional career till 22, I mean, you're 5 or 6 years behind. Behind the best top players.
I'm curious. As an athlete at the top of your game, you just said, I think, that a lot of that motivation came out of the relationship with a dad to prove excellence and all that. Is there a common denominator between other athletes like a Kobe Bryant who was in the locker room? Is there some common thread there, or is it uniquely different, you think, for each person that's at that level?
Well, I can't speak to everyone. I mean, there are plenty of good athletes who came out of secure, good households, in air quotes, right? I'm just learning. I've always tried to understand, what is it? Like, internally, intrinsically, what is it? Obviously, you have to have a level of athleticism that's elite, or you can't be a pro, right? So what is it that makes the best players the best players?
Well, it's all about motivation to some point, right? Like how hard you're willing to work and put the effort.
Yeah.
Because that talent,
willing to sacrifice?
There's a lot of guys that have a lot of talent, but if they don't have the motivation,
there's guys who have a lot more talent, and women who have a lot more talent.
Right.
So I mean, it's like any industry, right? I mean, to get to the top here, you have to have something different, right? There has to be
insurance. You don't have to have that much to get to the top.
You have to have something in you that drives you to be the
you
best.
don't have to be the smartest.
No.
You don't have to be. You know, it is a drive, and
that's right.
Thinking about things differently and just using, I think, different.
I mean, I think we talk about it a lot. Like if you talk about what's just sitting around our group talking about that, and I think that it's just in you to be that way. I don't think it's, you can have the talent.
Yeah, it's not nurture.
It's not something, you just have it inside of you.
But I think most people are seeded with that motivation at a young age. It doesn't have to come because of a lack of a presence of a parent, but some early childhood,
some environmental
thing seeded this motivation in you and drive.
Yeah.
I've kind of been like dealing with a little illness kind of thing for past 6 weeks. And I was like, what the hell is wrong with me? Like, I don't have that fire and drive.
Right.
I just got my first good night's sleep on Saturday night. And I got it again last night. And I woke up and it was like back.
Right.
And I'm like, I was almost depressed. It's like 6 weeks of not having that fire.
Yeah.
You're like, what the hell?
Yeah.
Well, and you've had that your whole life?
No,
that fire.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I've had it.
Okay.
It came from an early childhood memory that I seed back to that planted it, and I've had it ever since.
Was that the hose?
It was the water hose.
Yeah, the water hose.
Yeah.
The water hose did it.
Oh, yeah. It wasn't a beating. It was
Right. Well, interesting. What's interesting is you talk about like, it's almost therapy for me. My drive is my dad and my lack of relationship for him. Right. And I think that's interesting where you just pulled that out of me. Like I knew something was there, but like listening to you talk about it and like for people like to have that and we're asking like, what is it? It's gotta be something like you said in early childhood of missing or something wasn't there. You just wanted to drive past it to get their attention and get to wherever they may be. And it drives you to something.
And in certain industries, you don't need, to your point, you don't need athleticism or you don't need other skill sets, but you need something, right? Like there has to be something there. And I think for elite athletes, I look through it like when you're looking at kids and you're trying to decide at 14 who's going to be the best. Let's just use soccer as an example. Who's going to be the best soccer player at 14? If I'm looking at 20 of the quote best across the U.S., who's going to make it? And I think that's a question that every sport is asking because in college football, they don't get the draft right every year, right? Brock Purdy was the last pick in the draft, right? So what is it that, and one thing this is just a theory and I'm just starting to like pay more attention is the ability to, in sports, certain sports, process information quickly, especially in soccer.
Tom Brady effect here.
Totally. I think in soccer players, elite soccer players, and in quarterbacks, the ability to process information is insane because there's so many moving parts.
Many options.
And then it's decision making.
Yeah.
Right.
It almost has
really
to be
hard.
this intuition.
It becomes an intuition.
Yeah.
Right.
Because
but
you practice it so many times.
Right. But you have to have practiced. Because I played with a lot of guys who you practice all the time and they still don't do it.
Yeah.
Right. So you have to be able to take in the information, process it, and then like learn and grow and get better at it.
What's interesting is I have a cousin who is a scout for the Spanish league, and he talks about, because I asked him, what are you looking into these players, because he's got to pick from hundreds and hundreds of players he's looking at.
What age do you know? Or are these like professional? They're just looking at professionals.
He's looking from 13 to 18.
Oh yeah, that's interesting. Okay.
And he's like talks a lot about just watching their attitude and how they interact with the other players, and then also how they recover from making mistakes.
Interesting.
So he does a lot of that, and then he said probably the most important that he's seen is how the parents support.
Interesting.
Yeah, because they're not going to make it if they don't have the support of the parents.
Huh. And when he says support, like what's an example of good support? Has he said like
just allow the kind of what your mom did, is, hey, we're going to support you all the way as long as you have these boundaries, and they're willing to go all the way. And so that's why it was interesting with talking about your story and your mom is they're going to make a lot of investments in these kids, and that's where it can really make a difference. Is how the parents, whether it's one parent or it's a 2-parent system, is how they're going to support them through that.
So on that same note, you know that they just did an interview with that we're talking about kids in sports, and Hurley at UConn. He will not recruit a player who doesn't have a solid. How he looks at how they treat their parent or parents. If he sees that they don't treat him good, he passes. It doesn't matter how good they are at the sport. He immediately passes on them.
Interesting.
Which is kind of feeds into what we're.
Yeah.
Oh, that's interesting.
You know, as I heard you speak about kind of your journey, did you ever have like that? You hear Michael Jordan say how he didn't make the varsity basketball team, you know, in his high school or whatever it was, that gave him motivation. Never had any of that, right? Seems like you went ODP straight through
at a
lot of
really
success.
young age. I mean, the only thing that remotely resonates when I think I was 7 or 8, and now kids are on club teams at like 6 years old, but back then you didn't start till probably 9. So I think I was 8 and I was really small as a kid. I mean, I'm still small, but like I was skinny and tiny, and I tried out for the older 9-year-old team. I remember, it's funny what you remember, but I do remember being on the field and being around all these giants, you know, and like the coach called my mom and said, unfortunately, Landon didn't make the team. And I was like devastated, right? Now it's not like that triggered me to go on, but that's the only time I remember like being let down like that.
Not 2014 when you didn't get called up.
Well, I was done playing by then, so it didn't matter.
Way to open an old wound.
It did motivate me the rest of the year.
Yeah. Actually, kind of leading into I think Jamie mentioned, being depressed. I know you talk a lot about that, and throughout your career, you struggle with depression. And I think the fact that you talked about it has really inspired and helped a lot of people that also, have struggled or struggling. How did you, how did you see that through your career of, being the total motivated person of really pushing at the top of your field, but also going into those places of, that cloudiness of depression?
So I wasn't aware of, I appreciate you asking, until therapy. It wasn't, it's kind of a good and bad thing. I wasn't aware of it, but my life is much better now that I have just general awareness about myself. So until I got into therapy, I wasn't aware that all those childhood days where I just wanted to be alone in my bedroom were not about, wanting to play video games. It's just I was feeling depressed, or just wanted to be away from people. And through all the therapy, understanding what that is, but mostly having 2 or 3 pretty traumatic experiences in my adulthood that took me to like a couple weeks of a dark depression, and understanding what that's like and that other people are dealing with that was very eye-opening for me. At the same time, I had to do my job, which was really hard. So I have a lot of respect for people that have to deal with that. We never know. The biggest thing it brings, depression, the biggest plus of depression is it brings compassion, right? Mm-hmm. Because you know what you're going through, but nobody else does unless you talk about it. And so anytime you see someone who's, a little down or being annoying or they're whatever, you never know what they're going through, right? And so it makes you stop for a second and say, maybe they're having a bad day, or maybe something. And that's the beauty of depression. But I've not been open about it because I want to intentionally talk about it and because I've been through so much therapy, I've talked about it a million times, and it minimizes it for me. So to me, it's not a big deal.
Yeah.
But I realize why for other people that can be inspiring or helpful.
Well, is talking about it like de-shaming, because it has a stigma?
I never felt any shame about it.
Okay.
I've always viewed it as like when we have physical injuries, nobody second guesses you, right? If you pull your hamstring, they're not like, well, let's just, pull yourself up by the bootstraps and get back out there, right? Like, well, I can't run, so I can't play. So if you're struggling emotionally or mentally, it's the same thing, right? I mean, you cannot, and if anybody's ever been in that place, you can't do anything. My mom told me when we were kids, like she had some real serious depression. She couldn't get off the couch. Like she literally could not get off the couch for weeks at a time. And so when you've been in that debilitating situation, you get it like, oh, yeah, that's a real thing.
I think there's a major light shine. Wait, how do you say it? Shined?
Shined?
I don't know. Whatever. On it through, what's the lady's name? That was the gymnast, the female gymnast.
Simone Biles?
Simone, who pulled out.
Mm-hmm.
That, I think, was maybe one of the biggest, most, banner list awakenings of like, hey, this is a real thing. Even if you're successful at the highest levels, doesn't mean you're not susceptible to the same thing everybody else is.
Right. Well, you could go through a list of people who've dealt with this that are famous. Yeah. I mean, it's insane.
Yeah.
and you can almost make the case it's exacerbated by fame because your life is in the public eye. So if you make a mistake at work today, there's not
in the news.
There's not 10 million people tweeting you saying, "Hey, you idiot!
Right.
I can't believe you did that."
Yeah,
Simone Biles falls, and it's like, "What an idiot! She cost us the gold medal.
Yeah.
Destroyed our nation."
Yeah.
So,
well, speaking about being at the very top, where do you see in your career? Because of you being at the very top, like what was that? Was there a moment?
So back to it all being tied in. So through therapy. From 25, I think is when I started. And when I got to 2009, I was 27. So I was physically at my peak. And through all the therapy, I was also married previously. And I went through a separation and eventually a divorce. So in 2009 and 10, for about a year and a half, I was completely, I'm using this word as just generally speaking, completely free, right? For the first time in my life, I had shed my ego completely. I was not tied up in anything in the past, wasn't worried about the future. I was physically in my best shape. And so for about 18 months, I was insane. I mean, if I had played at that time on any team in the world, I would have fit in no problem. And I had 18 months where it was like,
it's amazing what freedom can do for you,
Totally.
Yeah. Well, we should probably transition to rapid fire.
Sure.
Did Mia warn you there'd be rapid fire?
She warned me there's going to be some uncomfortable questions. I think we've gone pretty deep already.
Yeah, we went deep.
I love it.
This will be surface level. It'll be easy.
No
Gabe, you want to kick us? Are you going to do some?
Sure, I'll do them.
All right,
I'll do some.
Why don't you kick us off?
I'll kick us off.
First, Maddie.
Yeah, let's go. How do you like to spend your alone time?
Playing golf.
That's right. That was easy.
No, I mean,
You go play it by yourself?
I will, yeah. I enjoy playing by myself.
I'd rather sit at home and eat popsicles. That's what I tell him every time he plays by himself. Man told me one time, don't play golf by yourself. You make a hole in one, nobody knows or believes you.
That's true. That's true. Yeah, probably playing golf.
Do you have any things that you collect? Something
Good question.
Sentimental or collect?
I'm not real materialistic in that way. Oh, well, I'm starting to, I guess you could say, collect golf shirts from different places I go.
All right.
I'm such a loser. All I talk about is golf.
I'm going to take 4 and 5 because they're tied together.
All right.
3 questions. Are you an introvert or extrovert?
That's a good question. It's a longer answer. Around people I don't know, very introverted. Because it's hard for me to trust people because of the life I've lived. Mm-hmm. When I'm with people I know, and Matt will speak to this, I'm like, I love to have a good time.
Absolutely.
Life of the party, have fun.
Yeah.
Totally.
Yeah.
So then what fills your bucket the most and what drains it the most?
So I hate it, but working out is crucial to me. People who deal with mental illness, like working out is almost the best thing, better than any medication. It's almost the best thing you can do. Mm-hmm. Golf definitely fills my bucket. spending good quality, non-whining, crying time with my kids and family fills my
That
bucket.
happens?
Yeah. Going on vacation with my wife fills my bucket.
Yeah.
What drains it is whining, crying kids. That just saps me. Not working out for long periods of time is not good for me.
Awesome.
Yeah.
What's something you've learned now or you've learned recently that's changed you?
Oh. Well, this has been a recent revelation for me. Back to like being so driven. I went through a period over the last couple years where I really, really wanted to find my next work passion. So either in youth soccer, or maybe I coached for a few years here in San Diego, so maybe coaching in MLS, or for maybe the youth national teams, something I would. So I interviewed, using air quotes, for a bunch of different things in those fields and got rejected every time. And it was purely from a place of just wanting to help and give back. And so that was really frustrating for me that I wasn't hired in any of those roles. And then as time's gone on, I realize as much as I love that and love being driven and working towards a passion, it's not healthy for me. It's not healthy because I just get so into it, almost like an obsession, and then other things in my life, my kids, my family, go to the wayside. And so I've made peace over the last few months, really made peace with taking my kids to school, golfing, working out, and just, I would say, quote, being lazy, but just doing other things instead of diving into work. And I'm actually really grateful now that I got turned down for all those jobs.
So is that like an awareness of like putting the ego aside or not leaning into the ego?
I think it's ego and just, again, this insatiable desire to succeed. Like, I have no question, this is going to sound egotistical, but this is just knowing myself, how I do anything is how I do everything. So I'm all in when I do something, all in. I have no question I would be, if not the best, one of the best coaches in this country. I have no question I would be, if not the best, one of the best youth soccer developers in this country. No question. But I don't know if that's healthy for me, right? So, in fact, I know it's not healthy for me all the time. So it's hard because I want to succeed and I'm driven to succeed, but I can pour that energy into golf and, more importantly, into raising my kids.
Is there something that you see of what's next beyond this current state?
It would be those things. It would be youth soccer probably, because the only way we ever, to your question, getting to win a World Cup is by developing players, and nobody's been through it every part of the way like I have, who also has coached, who also has, I think, the awareness to understand what these kids are going through, because being a coach can be very selfish. A lot of coaches are in it because they're trying to make money or their next contract or about them and winning. I don't care about any of that stuff. I just want to help. So it could be in that, but again, I'm at peace right now.
They do have like an academy group here where they take kids from all the different clubs and just help support them in developing them. I don't know if you're familiar with that here in San Diego.
What is it?
I'm trying to remember the name. It's like the academy, something like that.
There are different soccer clubs. I mean, we don't need to get into youth soccer right now.
Yeah.
But it's a total disaster. I mean, it's probably the single biggest reason why we haven't seriously competed for a World Cup. And it's frustrating, but again, if I did it, I'd be all in and other things would suffer. So
Right.
Want to move into Discover the Difference questions?
All right. So this in the Discover the Difference, one of the things that when you look back on your career and your life, what is something that younger Landon, what kind of advice, knowing what you know today, what kind of advice would you give him?
Be patient. When I went to Germany, I was really frustrated because I wasn't playing. And I wish I had somebody say to me, just keep going to practice every day, Keep training well, keep training hard. Eventually you will get your opportunity. Because when you're a kid, certainly when I was a kid, I played soccer because I loved playing soccer and competing. I didn't play soccer because I wanted to move to Germany and make money and practice all the time. I wanted to play soccer games, right? But part of that process sometimes is just being patient and making sure you understand the process and that it's going to take time. And I had none of that.
Is that where you're trying to put on your kids this idea of patience?
Well, I mean, the notion of patience for any kid is non-existent. They just don't understand, right?
Especially boys.
Totally. So yeah, you try at all time, but it's like early on, everyone says, we read this really interesting book early on with our kids about kids. And I think it was called It's Okay Not to Share. The concept of sharing, where we all like, just share with your sister, to a 3-year-old is zero. They have zero comprehension. So you can say it over and over and over and over and over. It's never going to register. It's like telling us, like, let's just speak Greek during this interview. And you'd be like, well, I can't. I have no idea how. And so it's just interesting, like patience, obviously it's developed over time and you want to keep explaining it to them. But at some point they're going to get it versus not.
Well, the other question is around difference. Is what's that special thing about you that makes you uniquely who you are?
Take this the right way. My ability to learn is off the charts high. So in most fields, art, I can't do. Like, I will never learn how to be an artist or whatever. But almost anything that I spend time on and try to learn, I can learn very quickly and very well. And that's just a genetic gift.
It goes back to that Tom Brady kind of thing, right?
Totally.
Yeah,
and so, golf's a good example, right? Once I can see it and understand it, then I can do it. And a lot of people don't have that gift, but that is what's made me successful, I think, more than anything in my life.
You're that kid who only had to be shown a drill one time, and you're like, boom, let's execute.
My under-17 national team coach, John Ellinger, tells this story. I don't remember it, but we were somewhere in Europe playing in a tournament, and he was showing us highlights. There was before this Ronaldo, there was another Ronaldo who played for Brazil.
Yeah, I remember.
And at the time in the 90s, when he would get on like a breakaway, most players on a breakaway, the goalie would come out and close the angle and they would shoot right away. And he would run, and as the goalie kind of set his feet, he would touch the ball past him and run by him and then roll it into the empty net. So he was showing us this video of him doing that like 6 or 7 times. And he said the next day we had a game, I got on a breakaway and I did it and scored. And I had never done that before. That's cool. Right, yeah. So it was one of those things.
You did that a lot.
I did a lot.
If you look at your highlights.
I did a lot in my career, but I just never occurred to me. But once he showed it on video, I was like, oh, I can do that. It's easy.
That's cool.
Right. Just do it.
Really cool.
Yeah.
Awesome, man. Well, for any listeners that come across this podcast that want to reach out or engage with you, what's the best way for them to do that? Or to follow you?
Good question. Well, I guess social media, though I'm not on social media ever, so they can.
So this Instagram, Landon
Well,
Donovan,
it is my Instagram.
Tim.
I'm just never on there. Yeah, sure. Or LinkedIn. LinkedIn's a good place. I go on there. I mean, I just use it to look, but I don't engage. Yeah. I follow zero people. Wife. I follow 0 people literally on Instagram.
Arlene's always like, how come you didn't post the pictures of the kids? I'm like, why don't you post the pictures of the kids every once in a while?
Why don't we just look at the kids? How's that?
Yeah. Cool. Well, thanks so much for coming on.
Hey, this was really awesome. I was not expecting to dive so deep, but I enjoy it.
Just your everyday insurance podcast.
Yeah. No, I like talking about real stuff, so thank you.
Thanks for coming on. We appreciate it.
Yeah.
It was fun.